went through. I think I grew up and had a pretty easy and privileged life. I'll talk a little bit about my parents that also contributed to my activities and my beliefs. So my mother is from Argentina. She's from a Jewish Zionist family. Her family moved to Israel in the early 50s after the state of Israel was established in 1948. And she and her brother were both drafted to the military. My mother was a soldier. My father is from Poland. He's a Holocaust survivor. He's the sole survivor from his family. Till today, he doesn't have any relatives that were found alive. But he was realistic, being 19 after the war. He stayed in Germany and he pursued, he learned to be an engineer, moved to the United States, to New York and then to Pittsburgh, which he worked for Draveau. And so I had a very normal American life. My father was always smiling and always optimistic. I knew nothing about the Holocaust being a kid, except for having his blue number on his arm. That was proof that he was in Auschwitz, and miraculously he got out of there, even though he was searched for 6 months. And I knew about Israel because my mother had family there. I'd been there when I was 4 years old. And the first time I heard that Israel had war, that was in 1967 when the Six-Day War broke. I remember being at the Whiteman School in Squirrel Hill, standing on the steps, and I was 5 years old, and there was this kid who had a radio, and he told me that there's war in Israel. Other than that, I had no idea that there's war, or I knew nothing about it. But in '69, my parents decided to move to Israel to join with my mother's family. And looking backwards, it's hard to believe that my family actually moved to Israel because of war. The war was successful, and Israel was empowered, and my parents lived there till today. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War broke, and you know that a war breaks in Israel because sirens start going. Sometimes they're false, and sometimes they're because of holidays and remembrance. But in Yom Kippur, we knew it was war, and my neighbor came out and told me that her husband was drafted. And that's the only thing that I remember, that there were airplanes. We would hear the airplanes, and I think Salsa mentioned you learn to distinguish noise, but you learn to identify. I knew there were Israeli airplanes, and I was not afraid. And you just grow up, and you just grow into it, and and as a child, I was 11 at the time. It was regular, normal childhood. Even though we lived in Haifa, it was about an hour from the northern border. In 1980, I went to the military, and I served in the Air Force Intelligence. And like here, when your child is a senior, not all, but whoever goes to college, everybody talks in the senior year where they're going to go to college. In Israel, everybody would talk where they want to serve in the army, and it's automatic. It's not a lottery. It's not voluntary. You don't get paid for it. And in the 80s, we didn't think about it. We didn't consider refusing. We didn't think that we had choice. There was no discussion about if it's just to go to the army, should we go to the army? It was just how things were. So I served in the army, and at the end of my service in 1982, the first Lebanon war broke, and I was against it, but I really didn't think I could do anything about it, and it luckily didn't affect my life. My boyfriend at the time, who I eventually married, he served in a quiet area on the Syrian border, and as much as Israel tried to provoke Syria for a war, luckily they didn't fall for it, and he's sitting here, and he's okay. But his unit from his mandatory service, they went into Lebanon, and about a third of the people that he served with were killed or wounded. And we got married 3 months after the war started, and the day of our wedding, five of his friends and our friends from were killed on that day. After we got married, we moved to live in Jerusalem, and from 82 to 87, before the Intifada started, life was really good in Jerusalem. We had student life. We would go to eat hummus in the old city, and we did go to demonstrations, and I didn't go to all of them. My husband thought they were too violent, and in 1983 there was a famous demonstration which Emil Grinsveit was killed with a hand grenade. And since then, we didn't go back to the market in Jerusalem because we would identify the people who would curse the peace activists, the people who demonstrated. And since then, we just used supermarkets. So that was one thing less that we did in Jerusalem. In 1992, the first Iraqi war broke, and Israel was shelled, but we lived on a kibbutz on the border, on the east border this time, very close to Jordan, and we felt very safe out of the target of the shells. And also my husband had a rifle, an M16 that he had in his car all the time. So I don't know that would protect us, but that's everybody. In Israel, you have to know that all the men would have rifles. All the men served in the army, they will all carry rifles, and that was like, you would see people walking in the street, and that was the norm. So in 1993, Oslo's talks started, and I remember the day that they announced the peace process. We lived at that time on a kibbutz, as I said, near Jordan, and about half an hour drive from Jerusalem. We worked in Jerusalem. I remember our drive from Jerusalem down to the Dead Sea where we lived, and we saw cars with blue plates, the Palestinian cars, and the people for the first time we had Palestinian flags, and they waved at us, and they smiled, and they honked, and we thought, it's like you feel when the war is over, but that was, I guess, just one day. So that didn't last, and in 1995, the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and all the hope was gone. So we lived in San Francisco for 4 years, moved back in 2000, and again, the air was, the feeling in Israel was optimistic. We heard from San Francisco that markets are being opened, and people are being hosted in these huge tents, and we had invitation to visit our friends of families from the San Francisco area in Ramallah and Gaza. We had our daughter's bat mitzvah, and we had our friend Dr. Izzaldin Abul Esh that we invited to my daughter's bat mitzvah at the time, and but the military wouldn't give him access, so he didn't come, and a few years later, 3 of his daughters were shelled by an Israeli tank. So between 2000 and 2002, that was when the second Intifada started. So after that summer, just as we returned from San Francisco, we had our holiday Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and that's when we saw on the Israeli television the killing that was reviewed, the killing of the 12-year-old boy that started the second Intifada, Muhammad Dura, and it was actually live on TV, and we were all looking just before our Rosh Hashanah dinner, and my daughter Tamar, who's sitting in the audience, was 6 at the time, and she was terrified and said she wants to go back to San Francisco. And as parents, our moves from Israel to the United States, it's career moves, and there was no way we were going to listen to her, and she said, in San Francisco there are bad things too. In California they have earthquakes, but she wasn't convinced. So anyway, we lived 2 years in Israel, and we started to do some activities. We participated with an organization called Windows Channels for Communication. This organization is led by Ruth Yetzmon, which their main goal is that they have a magazine for youth, written by youth in Arabic and in Hebrew. But we also, through this organization, we brought clothes to bring to refugees, transport olive oil from the occupied territories that were under closure. And in those days, there were quite a few terror attacks, and we just lived through this. And then we moved in 2002 back to the United States, back to Pittsburgh. So in 2006, I went to visit my parents in Israel, and the Second Lebanon War broke. And Sunday morning, I wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning to booms, and I knew we were attacked. It was actually all my life I lived with war events that I never felt, never heard. Life was very regular. If you live in Tel Aviv and the war is south of you or north of you, an hour away in each direction, or maybe an hour and a half, you couldn't feel it. I remember the discos were open, coffee shops were open, people continued to live their lives. So this was the first time that actually I heard booms, and it was in Haifa where my parents lived, so it wasn't too far. So, and that was more fun. I just cannot, I can't even imagine how it would be to live like that for, the week that I was there as a tourist. And just as we moved back to Pittsburgh, I was involved in activities with the Middle East Peace Forum. And what we try to do through education, try to show here in Pittsburgh different sides of Israel, and how there are people that are being active for peace. And and there are quite a few very good organizations. I have a list if anybody wants more information after. And I just wanted to conclude that as I grow older, I understand that women have a role in resolving conflicts. While in most of the countries we do not really do the fighting, we serve as facilitators of violence. We bear the babies, support the men, educate the children, and serve as a spine of the society. By our acceptance of these roles, we serve as compliances to war and oppression. And we have to refuse, we have to actively reject the politics of war. We can be active by protesting, educating, encouraging direct action such as boycott of companies that benefit from war and oppression. In Israel, there are many groups led by women, and I would like to highlight the Coalition of Women for Peace that pioneered the website Who Profits. And I think if you look at that in the United States, we'll find Who Profits. Finally, as an activist and a woman, I have learned over the years that we are too often willing to compromise on our position for the mirage of acceptance. If there is one thing that is clear to me, that we activists should not be willing to compromise on our moral positions. We should not compromise on human rights and civil rights. This is our privilege as activists. We should leave the politicians the option to compromise the deal. Because if we compromise, there will not be anybody that will push them to do the right thing. The recent success of the grassroots campaign against the Komen Foundation should show us the power of grassroots and the power of being committed and bold. We can do it also with the war. Thank you.